My name is Karin. I'm the executive director of an NGO called Data Friendly Space. We work exactly on this, on making technology and data available to organizations looking to make a social impact, a positive social impact, with humanitarian organizations being one of our most frequent partners. So before I introduce the panelists today, I want to give a little bit of a context to what we are going to discuss today. As said many times over the morning, we are living at a time of unprecedented humanitarian need. In fact, you don't even have to be a humanitarian professional to know this. And we are also living in a time where resources are not keeping up. A couple more dynamics is the very quick development of technology, artificial intelligence, one of them, but also others. And there's a huge inflow of new types of data and new types of data sets that humanitarians are dealing with. Satellite data, Earth observation data, heaps of secondary data out there and reports and assessments, and so on and so on, so also social media. So within this context, then, this field of information management as an expertise and a field within the humanitarian sector is actually quite new. And it is considered that, and I'm sure the panelists will say more, that 2010 Haiti earthquake response was really considered as kind of the watershed moment for humanitarian information management. Lots of raw data, lots of new technology, a lot of new techniques on how to collect data, how to analyze data emerged. And this was actually complemented by a lot of tech-savvy, data-savvy volunteers flying in, trying to help out the humanitarian ecosystem. But at that time, responders were largely unprepared for all of this know-how, all of this data. And the field staff lacked the technological tools and capacity to really absorb this data. The humanitarian system didn't have many processes, protocols like we like to have in place when it comes to information management. Although I believe a few years early in 2008, the Red Cross National Societies did establish guidelines for emergency needs assessments, for instance. And there was really a lack of kind of ecosystem for collaborating on data. So really, it was then that the humanitarian sector saw a real rapid rise in initiatives to help collaborate and collect and analyze data jointly. So the Humanitarian Data Exchange was founded in 2014. The Data Entry and Exploration platform, DEEP, was founded and established a couple of years later, both really key central repositories for data and humanitarian data today. And it's not only about extracting data, it's also analyzing and making sense of that data. So today, the Humanitarian Needs Overview, of course, presents a comprehensive joint analysis of humanitarian situations, evolving needs. Fast forward to today, November 2023. In the humanitarian community, the role of information management is considered critical for effective humanitarian aid. And we will unpack this here in the next hour and a half. So I'm really glad to welcome our esteemed panelists this morning. Please do come on stage. Really a great mixture of expertises and engagements and experiences. So starting from right next to me, we have Luke Caley. Luke has been the information management lead at IFRC since 2018. He has overseen the launch of the IFRC Go platform and really a growth in data analytics to support the work of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. A big fan of maps. He's still a volunteer for an organization called Map Action. And Luke holds a master's in remote sensing and spatial analysis. Then we have Zineb. Zineb Bhaby is the head of the data solutions lead at NRC as of this week. So we can't pester her too much on NRC, but she comes with over a decade of experience and dedication to humanitarian information management. And Zineb is also a distinguished tech leader focusing on technology's role in addressing humanitarian challenges. And we have Javier Teran, is the partnerships lead for Center for Humanitarian Data at UN-OCHA since 2014. Javier is a statistician, and he started with the UN in 2001, but has also served as a statistician in the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. So welcome to all of you. And much like in the previous panel, We'll give you, all of you, an opportunity to kind of reflect a little bit on the last 10 plus years that the information management sector has really professionalized within the humanitarian sector. And and then we will go into questions. So Javier, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy and glad to be with all of you. Maybe I tell you a little bit about the work of the Center for Humanitarian Data, just in case you don't know what it's all about. So the center was created in 2017 by UNOCHA with the goal of increase the use and impact of data in humanitarian response. As we have been hearing on these different panels, data is coming more and more every day. So very important to reach that goal is the management of the humanitarian data exchange, which is the platform of the humanitarian community, where you can find data sets related to every humanitarian active crisis, from Afghanistan to Yemen. And also on the platform, you can find data about the Sudan onset crisis. For instance, you can find data about the Morocco earthquake that just happened a few weeks ago, or the escalation of hostilities in the conflict of Gaza and Israel. But in addition to that, the platform also manages data explorers, and we built one very interesting to monitor the crisis between Ukraine and Russia, where we were able to put different data sets for you to have a more complete view of the crisis. So data about IDPs, internal displaced people, refugees, conflict events, the humanitarian funding. So in that way, you could have a better perspective of what's going on. But in addition to that, the center is also working a lot on data literacy. As we have heard on the sessions, there is also a lack of our community to understand and to deal with data. So we want to increase the confidence of humanitarians to work with data, to work and do analysis. The other very important part is data responsibility. So as we heard, we want to increase the trust between partners. We know that failing on following the guidelines on data responsibility, that has an effect on affected population, but also on the trust among ourselves. And the last area that I just wanted to bring to you, so in case you want to work with us and engage with us, is on data science. So as you know, there is a lot of information that can be used to anticipate the impact of a crisis. So there is a team in the center that has been building models to anticipate the impact of crisis. So there is a lot of information out there. I mean, not as much as I personally wanted, but in some instances, a lot. So we can, the team can develop some trigger mechanisms that they can say, okay, there is a huge impact of this flood coming. Maybe we can activate some money, some funding, so the population can be more resilient to that. So just in a shell, those are the very important areas of the center.
Great. Thank you, Javier. And lots to unpack later in our discussion.
Absolutely, yeah.
Luke, can I go to you next?
Of course. And yeah, thanks, echo Javier's thanks for the welcome. It's great to be back here for my second time in Estonia. And so, yeah, I was talking to somebody at the lunch break, Greta, about what the information management actually is. And it's in between a little bit the roles of IT, potentially, and MEAL for the Estonian Refugee Council, for example, where actually, you know, we're about taking the data, but making sense of it, and ensuring that it's used for decision making. So it's all about that whole process of collection, of managing the data in a way that can be accessible, and then helping decision makers to basically make decisions that are based on that evidence. And so my team does that for the IFRC, which is the, excuse me, the Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. We basically are the secretariat which represents those 191 different Red Cross and Red Crosses around the world. And we support strategic and operational coordination. When there's a big emergency, the National Society, the Red Cross, will ask for our assistance. And so my team helps to provide that assistance, whether that's people going and supporting the Red Cross to respond to the emergency, or mobilizing a team which is around the world. We have a network of over 200 people from all around the world who can provide support for individual data and information management tasks. We also focus on systems. So you mentioned the Go platform, which is basically our way of channeling the information into a kind of central system where everyone can see how that works. It's developed over the last 5 years to be not just around data and information management, but you can see the whole range of processes that a national society will go through, from planning to preparing for emergencies, right through to responding and requesting for funding through that platform, through to understanding and learning on the basis of what's happened in that emergency. So you can have that full cycle is available through a single platform. And yeah, the last part, as I mentioned, we focus a lot. We basically think we're in the decisions business, basically. So we're aiming to make our decision makers, who often will use all kinds of different experiences and techniques to come to a decision. What we want to do is move away a little bit from the variability, the unwanted variability in decision making, be more transparent, have better decision making systems, and provide the evidence that they need. So that's a key part of what we do. And just, if you'll allow me, one reflection on the years since Haiti. As you say, that's a real change in the way that the humanitarian system understood information management and its potential. And actually, this is my first job with information management in it. And when I first arrived at the IFRC, within a month, I received a policy on information management, which was issued by the Library and Archives Department. So I wondered what job I'd actually taken. And actually, the reality is information management is little understood in many organizations. But it's essentially to be alongside the operations manager, making sense out of the situation, bringing order to chaos, all of those kinds of aspects. And yeah, in Haiti, that was actually, I did my thesis on the use of geospatial imagery and analysis for Haiti, and it did mark a big shift. We've made a lot of progress since, and actually, it's a bit like the boiling frog. You don't always realize how much change we've managed, but there's a lot more that we must do, and I'm sure we can get into those details today.
Thanks, Luke, for reminding us what the title of today's panel is, that
Exactly.
make sense, not necessarily just data, and that's really what the information management area of expertise tries to add to the humanitarian sector in decision-making. Zineb, over to you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It has been mentioned by a couple of us this morning that Tallinn is not the center of the humanitarian assistance world. But when it comes to digitalization and data, I think it might as well be. I'm a big fan of the successes that the Estonian government has made in e-governance, and I think the humanitarian system can learn a lot from that. We were talking about learning over lunch. I think this is a good place to learn, and I'm glad to be here. I'm also glad that this panel is sandwiched by cash and localization. And I would love to have that conversation with cash and localization colleagues that are present here, maybe at the end of this day or over drinks. But I think these two topics these three topics are very much linked, and digitalization is not in itself like how it was talked about cash this morning. It is not a thing in itself. It's a tool that humanitarians have embraced, and it is about time. We've come a long way. As you mentioned, Haiti, we've come a long way in the last 10 years. It is no longer a question if data is important or if data is necessary to run a response effectively. But now it's really about how to do it effectively, how to do it in a responsible way. We talk about data responsibility a lot the last 2 days. How to do it also in a way that is inclusive and that takes into account all the challenges that are not limited to digitalization, but really that we see across all aspects of our work as humanitarians. I am today representing the Norwegian Refugee Council, but as Karin just mentioned, I just started this week. NRC is very keen on building capacity globally to support our ongoing operations in the field. It is my team is pretty fresh, and we are slowly moving from supporting head office to really supporting the activities in the field, and also working on partnerships with you guys and with anyone of you who's interested. So yeah, but before that, I worked with multiple organizations working on these topics that I'm happy to discuss with you today.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's get going with, I have a number of questions on topics that you guys have all already mentioned. I want to go back to the complicated question Luke asked from Juliet during the opening panel on this question about ecosystems. And Luke's question was on humanitarian ecosystems. I'm going to bring it back to you on what does this idea of data ecosystem mean for you? We talk quite a lot about this sector, about data sharing, the importance of data collaboration. But this idea of data ecosystem and ecosystems that in general, as Juliet also said, they're kind of fuzzy, right? We kind of throw these words around. All of us think about it differently. And I really want to take advantage of the fact that you guys are all working on various layers of so-called the systems. So Zineb, I wanted to start from you and really zoom in on this organizational level, humanitarian organization level data ecosystem that you believe should be in place to say we are doing data well.
Well, ecosystem is a big word. I think I could talk more of lack of ecosystem as such. I think, like all of us have, maybe not all of us, some of us in some organizations came from the IT departments of organizations or have to work together with IT departments that are have been historically dealing with data, but business data as such. And then it is still a struggle now, 10 years in, to figure out how to use those tools or also skill sets that are already existing within the organization to support programs. I think we're not there. I don't think NRC is there yet. We are planning to go there. And then there are organizations that don't, where it's just practically impossible because the ICT capacities are only able to cover the needs, the business needs of the organization. So it is a bit of, I think, from an organizational perspective, an organization development question that I cannot answer as an IT professional. But I think you've mentioned systems. In terms of humanitarian initiatives. There are some systems that I think are worth supporting and are worth adopting across all organizations. And we talked about this also a lot. How can we not reinvent the wheel, use what's there, work on partnerships? And I leave it, I'm sure, Javier, you've got a lot of experience with how HDX has been adopted or how Go has been adopted by different national societies. So yeah, I think it's a big discussion.
Yeah,
thank you for.
Thanks, Zineb. Let's move on to, let's take the network approach next. Obviously, Luke, you have worked with Start Network, now with a network of actors within the IFC movement. What does data ecosystem mean to you within that network?
This is partly why I was asking Juliet for earlier today for a good answer. But yeah, for me, ecosystem, it reminds me of actually a book that I'm reading by somebody from the LNAP group who now works with the British Red Cross, Ben Ramalingam, who talks about complex systems. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around it at the moment. But he mentions an interview he had with somebody who's trying to learn from biological systems, the so-called biomimicry, to see whether human systems can learn from nature, essentially. And when they asked this expert in the field, what does an aid system look like? He said slime mold. Which isn't a great description in one way, but if you think of how slime mold works, it's diverse. It emerges where there is food available. It has a way of communicating and has redundancy. And so, in a way, you could see us as all in that frame of mind. Anyway. To us, ecosystem and systems analysis is becoming more useful and more used by our team to basically get away from the idea that we have linear answers to linear problems. And so when you're thinking about a cache seems to be a magic bullet in some ways, but then all the dynamics that happen as a result of introducing additional money to a particular household to then understand all the impacts on the markets, the social dynamics, you really need to have this better understanding and not just a simplified view of the world. So it behoves us actually to start thinking in this way, even if, honestly speaking, it's very difficult to wrap your head around all of the impacts that you're going to have in any humanitarian intervention. Often those unintended impacts are so important that we need to be looking at those things. For us, when we think about the Go platform, it's a very linear process, and so we take it as the disaster management cycle. As I mentioned, you can plan with the platform, so you can understand, where the capacities are. You can respond based on impact forecasts. So you're getting a kind of linear way of looking at a humanitarian response. But actually, the way that we can use the data that's a part of that ecosystem is how we understand basically where there are different approaches that the national societies, this wonderful but beguiling network of 191 different organizations, what they're doing and what we can learn from those is the value of the Secretariat, essentially, is to try to identify some of those adaptive approaches to crises that we all increasingly are facing. So it's not just in those traditional humanitarian contexts, but increasingly in Europe and places that are not used to responding as such, but finding what works in one context and then scaling that and making sure that it's available for the other Red Cross and Red Crescents across the world. So that's how I starting to understand what we mean by ecosystem in this context.
Great, thanks, Luke. And now lifting the ecosystem idea to this global humanitarian partnerships and partnerships ecosystem. Javier, how do you see data ecosystems?
Yeah, maybe I take the audience to 10 years back, maybe even before, like in the beginning of the year 2000, and that was actually the reason why we came up with the idea of XDX. Before, in the past, when humanitarians were looking for simple data sets like the boundaries of a country, the population figures, the location of health facilities, education facilities, they will need to send an email to the people in the country, and you will need even to know somebody, like, hey, Luke, do you have the boundaries for Somalia? Okay, here they are, and there was an exchange of emails. Then Luke, because in our sector the turnover rate is very high, next time was a crisis, you will email to Luke, and Luke is gone. He's now in Iraq. Like, hey, Luke, do you have the boundaries? Oh, no. So it was a lot of a missing opportunity. So we came up with that idea of creating a single platform where humanitarians could come and find those baseline data sets that you need for a humanitarian response, data about the people affected, but also data sets about the response. So that was kind of the inception idea of XDX. And in 2014, we started convincing a handful of organizations to share the data on the platform. So we started with a few hundred data sets and 3-4 organizations that they believe in the idea, and they start sharing data on the platform. Now, after 10 years, because next year we're turning 10 years, we have a little more than 21,000 data sets and contributed by more than 300 organizations. And we really see, and maybe I debate with what you said, I think there is an ecosystem there, and I think XDX is an anchor of the data ecosystem, and we see more and more people trying to join this community. Yes, there is also a lot of proliferation of new data platforms, so everybody now is developing their own portal where you can go and access the data, but also there's an opportunity, and I think the opportunity for XDX for the years to come is to create not an API of APIs. I don't know if I'm using too much acronyms, but it's just to connect computers one to another, but also to be able to increase the interoperability of data. So that I think there is an opportunity there, and for that we are working on a new project that will come soon to the light. It's called HAPI, H-A-P-I. It's going to be happy, but it stands by the Humanitarian API. So we want to create a way where users could connect to that HAPI machine and being able to do better analysis, better develop, as you said, Luke, do analysis based on evidence and be more consistent with the work that we do. So that is coming, but I see the ecosystem there, of course, with some gaps. You know, if you come to XDX, in case you haven't been there, there's a lot of very important data, but also there are some data gaps, and that those data gaps that we haven't been able to identify which organization could provide that data, but also data that is difficult to access. You know, we are not in the sector where data is so just hanging there. We have accessibility constraints, budget constraints, private issues constraints, a lot of those aspects. But I think XDX is, the Humanitarian Data Exchange platform is strong on that and building on that trust among partners, but also building this data ecosystem. But with caveats, of course. Yeah. But we are there.
Great. So now we've answered that question and demystified what this data ecosystem could mean. How does development data fit with the humanitarian data in the ecosystem as baseline? There is this, often we consider this whole other world out there, these development people. How, in your experiences, how well and where is the interaction point between development data and humanitarian data? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can. I mean, the kind of the situation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent is we're there before, during, and after. Most of the organizations have been around for over 100 years, and so they're there when there's gray skies and when there's blue, and so we work to kind of develop their capacities and develop their accessibility to the data that they can use for better evidence-based programming, even before an emergency, let's say. And yeah, when we're talking about development data, we're talking about the contextual information of that country, and there are core sources which you often want to find them on HDX, and as long as that organization or government fulfills their responsibilities, then that's how we look at what we call secondary data. So not the information that we're collecting ourselves, but the information that is out there to help us to just better understand the context and better target limited resources, basically. And so, yeah, there's no, in our sense, there isn't really a division between the two. Of course, there's different types of information that are collected in an emergency, and different tolerance for the quality of that as well, because we've mentioned this idea of good enough. That's fair when time is of the essence. But yeah, there's a lot of information that we pull in quite quickly now. So it's not, as Javier was mentioning, the same as it used to be, where it was beer or Wi-Fi, which would attract enough people to be able to get that USB stick of data. Exactly. But now we have we'll talk about APIs again and again. So probably, basically they're the pipes between different systems. And if there is an organization that doesn't have an API that's sharing their data, then they're not part of the ecosystem, and they're not part, or at least they're not a visible part of the ecosystem, because they're not sharing the information that they're collecting, which ultimately is probably information not about themselves as an organization, but about people, and so and the situation at large. So that's fundamentally one of the kind of sine qua non, the minimum responsibility is to share the data that we have.
Great.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think the development data goes in this realm of data preparedness that we all talk about, but no one's doing it properly because it suffers from the same issues as like preparedness action in general, that there is no funding for preparedness. So you have to somehow do it, data preparedness after disaster. And I think in the case of disasters that are exacerbated by climate change, we know that a disaster will happen again. So this data that we've gathered while we are there, we should somehow also keep it in a way that it could be useful in the next disaster. But there is a lack of data preparedness also requires that someone is on the ground to be able to talk to government agencies or academia in the country, or that would have that type of data that we don't necessarily find easily as humanitarians. I know that there are also some databases from the World Bank or other organizations globally that also keep a lot of data, don't necessarily share it. So I think it is these efforts of data preparedness that need to be put in place, but it's just not happening because of lack of funding again.
If I can add to that point, on XDX, I mean, we define humanitarian data in the context of XDX as data that is used for the context of the crisis. So in that aspect, we have a lot of data, especially from the World Bank on development, and we use it to also provide the humanitarians the baseline of the information. Also, we define humanitarian data about the humanitarian needs, people affected, people reached, number of IDPs, refugees, and so on, and data about the response. So when we started XDX, we learned a lot from the World Bank. I mean, they were the first one to have this open data platform. And if you come to the platform, I think there are like approximately 4,000 data sets about development from the World Bank. And we see that humanitarians are using that data also in their analysis. When it was the COVID-19 pandemic, we also developed a data explorer where you could find data from different areas related to the COVID pandemic. And we were also adding some reports that how the pandemic will be affecting development, but also how will be the humanitarian response. So I think, I mean, we live together. It's like a marriage. It's like you have to live with that. And what we're trying to do is just to make it more accessible. I mean, as you said, sometimes it's not easy to have access to those data sets, but at least on the platform, we managed to have a few organizations on the area of development that are sharing those data sets on the platform.
Great. I want to ask a little bit about what Zineb also mentioned is the importance of actors on the ground in terms of validating, verifying data. And let's talk about needs assessment. So this is a quote from the Grand Bargain signatories that says, Grand Bargain signatories require needs assessments that are impartial, unbiased, context sensitive, timely, up to date. That is a lot of boxes to tick in a humanitarian sector that is, in terms of actors, incredibly diverse. We are working and relying a lot on data from government agencies that perhaps don't always share the same types of values as us, same with the private sector. So with this mixture of actors with various, let's say, values, viewpoints, how do we make sure that our needs assessments, in fact, are impartial, unbiased, context-specific? What is the process there?
Red Cross.
Yeah, happy to take that one. I mean, needs assessments are, let's be frank, not done as often or as well as we'd like in almost every context. That's the sad fact of it. It's you know, is it a problem of demand? Is it a problem of supply? I'm not sure, but you know, we make decisions on allocation of funding with less evidence than I would like, and the decision-making system itself, that we can discuss in another time. But also, yeah, that essentially needs assessments are there for us to better understand who needs what kinds of assistance at that particular moment. And yeah, we do have all of those processes in place, and you know, it's common to all of our organizations. One of the things that I think is both a frustration currently and an opportunity is for us to mutualize our intelligence, essentially. So you'll know about a platform called Deep, which yeah, I think you introduced in the opening remarks, which helps us to use secondary data, so the information from other organizations processed through a kind of analytical framework so that we have all this access to the same information so that we can use it for our own analysis, but that we're able to identify based on something of interest, a geography or a particular target, particular part of the humanitarian profile, we can find that information more easily so that we can understand it better. So that's a great tool, but in order to get there, we need more needs assessments. And actually, we all more or less use the same kinds of approaches. I think, needs assessments often are with the government, if there's a disaster law, and the Red Cross is often written into that disaster law to be the organization which collects that information. And so there's often a standard questionnaire. Unfortunately, I mean, a recent example in Mozambique was, quite typical of the fact that there is a standard somewhere, but was it the V2 or V2 final? Or was it the V2-3 final? And as you've then digitized using, we use Kobo, which is one of the big advances. Everyone uses mobile technology. I mean, going back to ALNAP as well. That's one of the great advances of the last 10 years or so. We're doing, most organizations will now collect data in a structured way, which makes a big difference for analysis. It's not just, driving around and gaining impressions from focus group discussions and so on, which is valuable in itself, but is not very useful beyond that, that individual analyst's experience. And so, we do collect information in a more structured way using these like standard forms, but I think that we could do better to share the kinds of information that we're collecting. But ultimately, just to finish that point, there are things like survey design tools, which we've developed in collaboration actually with WFP. In that case, we could have done it ourselves, and actually but instead we made the conscious choice to work with another organization to make sure that we're working in a common way. And I think we honestly should be doing that more often, and maybe incentivized to do so by donors or whoever has power. And I'd probably finish by I suppose talking about what was mentioned in the last panel about data being power. Obviously, this Spider-Man sticker is not just there because my daughter put it there, but because with great power comes great responsibility, and that's what it reminds us all of, and the fact that actually data is we see the collection of data by organizations as something that gives us power, gives us intelligence that the other organization doesn't have. And actually we need to be better about sharing that information earlier and with more humility, basically.
And Zineb,
if I can just jump on what Luke mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned DEEP. And the reason why DEEP was created also is basically to solve this problem of collaboration around needs assessment. I think it is very important to do assessments jointly, not only for not bothering the same household, but with different organizations coming in at different days, but also to have a more continuity of understanding the needs and a better systematic approach to doing it. And I think DEEP solves that problem with providing, that's another ecosystem, the system. Also having analytical frameworks that are agreed on before, that practitioners have sat around tables and discussed at length, sometimes at too much length. But I think this is a really good example of standardization and collaboration. So that's, I wanted to point that out again.
And unless Javier,
very briefly, if I may, I just want to maybe tackle that question from the data ethics perspective. And I see now with this joint analysis, I think there's more transparency of how we're collecting the data. And from the SDX perspective, now we are getting more humanitarian needs overview estimations broken down by gender, by levels of people with disabilities, by age groups, and that gives like a better sense of the people affected that we want to serve. But also there is a lot of information that organizations are sharing, whether the survey was a little bit stopped because in certain areas there was conflict and so on. So, like people are more conscious about the ethics, data ethics elements when it comes to analysis. So I'm very happy to see that more often.
Great. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about data responsibility also later. So we have slowly moved towards this topic of technology. And I wanted to put it off because in the beginning, because often we jump into this idea of technology, but really technology in the context of humanitarian data is an enabler. It's a tool, as you also said. So can you, and I mean, artificial intelligence, obviously everybody wants to know how organizations are already tapping into it. But before we go into concrete use cases, when it comes to information management and data, when is technology an enabler and when does it distract us? Do you guys come across moments in your work when you're like, oh, here we are again with a software or a tool. Can't we just grab this Excel or paper and pen and just try and interpret the data that we have? When is technology a distraction versus when is it an enabler?
If I may, I mean, it's always distraction. As Juliette was saying, we love Chinese stuff, like, oh, this is fantastic, let's use it. But, I see that it's harder not to use it, but to understand the implications, especially on data responsibility. Like, we are like, okay, let's use it. But then we bump into, but what about what's going to be, how are we going to share this data? We're going to disclose the identity of the beneficiaries and this kind of stuff. So I think it's always distraction. But I see as well that it's really also enabling a better response. So just speaking from the XDX perspective, just recently with the student onset crisis in Morocco, the earthquake, the floods in Libya, we got data from Google Research. So they call me, they say, hey, we have amazing data set that you can use for the response that we develop using AI. So they took some satellite imageries from the area, and they developed these buildings footprints, that we couldn't do. It's very difficult to do. The images are huge, hundreds of gigabytes, but they have the know-how, they have the data scientists. So they were able to develop these footprints that they can be used for humanitarian response, for population planning, for vaccination, for many things, and they shared it on XDX. The issue was at some point is that data set was super useful, but also we realized that the skills were not so much present on the community. They said, like, they call me, now the users, that data set seems to be fantastic, but how should I use it? I'm like, well, that is something that you should know. So Google then gave us some information how to use it, but I see it's attractive, like something shiny, people want to use it, but when it's there, then the skills are not so present. But I saw one case I want to share.
Zineb, is technology this shiny thing that we don't?
Well, these are really good examples you're mentioning, Javier. Like the issue why it becomes a distraction is not because it is in itself a distraction for humanitarians, but because there is a lack of skill set. There is a big gap of skills between the data scientists in your team and the person on the ground distributing aid. So how do we bridge this gap of capacity and what we call data literacy? And there is a lot of work, really great work done by the Federation on this regard. But I think really this is the biggest challenge, is how to adopt technology within organizations that it just becomes second nature, that you don't have to discuss why we are using this tool or that tool. It's just part of the business as usual. But you also mentioned Google, and you mentioned, so I don't know if it's time to talk about this yet, but I think it's great. This is actually also a really good example of why humanitarians shouldn't be the ones doing that kind of work, that Google can do better. So we should really leverage partnerships with private sector, with big tech, but at the same time, we need to be very careful how we involve these organizations in our work, because it does put a huge risk on our humanitarian principles, and these are things that I think we often neglect because we go after shiny things and then discover later that, oh, that was actually not a great idea. Because there are people in this, actually like big tech also went through different phases of adaptation and challenges also in regards to data responsibility. Diversity wasn't really on their radar until recently. So these are things that we need to take into account when we use their tools. And these are things that we need to take into account even more when we are talking about artificial intelligence. The need for validation on the ground and the fact that data is biased by nature. So.
Luke, if you can also answer the question and talk a little bit about how you guys at IFRC are using artificial intelligence like natural language processing techniques. And
Okay. Oh, so we're getting onto the big shiny elephant in the room, ChatGPT, and that use of it for all kinds of like generative production of documents and so on. So yeah, I mean, just before I get there, for us, the use of data and technology is it essentially, as I mentioned before, it's the title of the talk today is about how we inform decision makers essentially. And so the recent kinds of situations that we've seen in the Middle East and so on, there's often not a lot of data actually. It's really it's more about trying to make sense, trying to look at different scenarios, different response options, thinking about the outliers and considering what we would do in those contexts. And that's what our team is responsible to do, to then have the decision maker basically have the full range of the potential routes that humanitarian assistance might be provided, let's say. But we did actually try to use ChatGPT to help with those scenarios. So we asked it essentially to produce something which would lighten or make our life a bit easier or quicker, but actually it wasn't very good. And still, I think there is a risk that we use those tools to jump ahead of the actual cognitive process that we all need to go through, because actually the scenario, the final document, is often not as important as the process of discussion to get there. But we are, seeing some applications of natural language processing and large language models, which are, I don't know how familiar the audience are with these new technologies, which are somewhat old, but in a sense they're the same kinds of things that we studied 10 years or so ago, but trained on much larger data sets. So large language models are trained essentially on everything that has been digitized on the internet. And so that's the reason why we can get such good returns from our prompts these days, even if that's kind of only half understood even by those who are actually developing the models. They understand the equation, but not necessarily exactly how we're getting such good responses, which means that we do introduce different types of risks. This idea of hallucination, where ChatGPT or large language models will produce what sounds accurate but is accurately wrong, and it's just invented potentially figures and a fact which isn't actually a fact. So we have to be very careful of those things. However, we are using large language models where we have collected over 500 different operations, thousands of individual snippets of learning, which we have a whole framework to tag what that learning, what it refers to essentially, whether it's a geography or a population or a type of response modality. And then we have all this data, we have a dashboard. Not many people actually use the dashboard, and so we're using large language models to classify even more information to then synthesize it, so a short summary, because we realize that people don't really read very much, and so because we're used to scrolling these days, it needs to be very, very short and very to the point in order to make any kind of impact in terms of improving practice. And that's just in terms of improving the practice that's already known, rather than thinking a bit more broadly. But yeah, that's how we're using it.
Yeah, Zineb, did you want to add anything to the AI discussion or
Yeah, I mean, you have to stop me at some point. But I mean, just to compliment on what you said, Luke, on large language models. These are really one of the best examples of why AI is useful. Well, it's not useful for everything we do, and it's. Like with any other technology is not always the solution to all problems. There are many problems that are very, very low tech, and we just go in with on our high horses. But I think basically data in the humanitarian system has been always scarce, and a lot of it is because we had for a long time everything on Word, or Excel was already like a big revolution, and a lot of text-based data. So it is just natural to think that now we need to use advances in technology to process that data and make sense out of it. And I think if we just use that, we already solved a lot of problems and saved a lot of our colleagues a lot of time processing big files and PDF reports and these sort of things. And we shouldn't go much further than that. I mean, there's also a lot of really useful use case for it in translation to like really bridge the gap between practitioners from headquarters or local levels, whatever you want to call it these days. So I think for these two use cases for me are really great for AI or machine learning algorithms. And then there is the fact that we have, if we want to use satellite imagery, these are huge amounts of data, and where computer vision can be very useful, and fast ways of processing images is really useful. Apart from that, I don't see much. I mean, we are doing a lot of predictive analytics in some areas, but it's tricky. Yep. And I think we should not think that now is the time to go on predicting everything. So I think you have probably some more to add to that.
Yeah, Javier, but I want to tie this in. You can add, absolutely, but also to ensure we give time to our audience.
Sure, absolutely.
And would love to, you can absolutely tie in this idea of AI and how and what are the suitable use cases. But I also want to you, Javier, pose this question of data responsibility. And with the increased need for data sharing that we've talked about, all these different data inflows, technologies such as artificial intelligence, where do we stand with this idea of data ownership, data responsibility in the humanitarian sector? You, from the principals perspective, and Luke and Zineb, you from the application perspective. Where are we today with humanitarian data ownership and responsibility?
Sure. I mean, the center has been working a lot on developing these guidelines on data responsibility, like really working in the Ukraine crisis, now in the OPT crisis as well. These guidelines, like even information sharing protocols, data and information sensitivity classification, and data impact assessment, and so on. And we see more and more adoption. It's still not as the level that we wanted to enable data sharing, but we see the community more aware of that. You know, at the beginning, like maybe a few years ago, we used to get a lot of sensitive data sets being stuff to be shared on XDX. Now we see less and less. I mean, on XDX, every new data set that comes to the platform goes to a system of quality where we ensure that the data is not sensitive, the data comes with enough metadata that touches on who is the owner of this information, under which law we can share this information, what is the source of the information, what is the time reference to the data it refers, and we see more and more accountability. Ownership, I would say, like, you know, many of these surveys, I always insist, belongs to the people affected. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say, I would say it's public domain, but we do need to make sure that the anonymatization is in place in case it's a sensitive data set, and people should know this classification that we go. And of course, that classification depends on the context. So for instance, on XDX, we have a lot of data sets related to health facilities. So it may not be sensitive in the case of Colombia, so you can go to XCX and find all the health facilities in Colombia, but it's not going to be the same in Ukraine, for example. That data set of the location of education and health facilities in Ukraine is sensitive enough, so you won't find it on the platform. So we see more trusted data sharing and more kind of like a passing the ownership to the community is what I see more often.
Thanks, Javier. Luke, do you want to add?
Yeah, just really quickly, because I do want to keep the time for the questions. Just on picking up this point about accountability. So we have this approach in the Red Crescent called the community engagement and accountability, which talks a little bit to the AAP, the accountability to affected populations, and often the Red Cross, because it's present in that, the volunteers are from the communities that are affected. They're often the trusted actor, and so often are in that position to be collecting feedback around the humanitarian response on behalf of the whole system, basically. And that's more and more the case with the pandemic. There was a kind of partnership between UNICEF and IFRC to create a collective service, which is a great kind of initiative to essentially, rather than every organization asking again some feedback on their intervention, to have some form of collective ownership amongst the humanitarian sector, at least, to not just collect that information, but use it and follow through. Now, the use and the follow through is still, I think, lacking, if I'm being completely honest, in many cases. But it very much helps for us to hear that community perspective in terms of what their preferences are. Do they prefer cash, or do they actually prefer some other form of assistance? And so, that's increasingly an important data that we should be using for designing our programs. So.
Great. Zineb, do you want to add?
Just to quickly add on that, I think data responsibility is very important. To have policies is important. But I really believe that it's time to move from just having policies and standards to how can we operationalize this in a technology level. I think in the lack of a suitable technology to protect data, we are just producing more and more documents and guidelines that no one's going to use because they're just not operationalable. So I think here again, it would be great to learn from how the Estonian government does it with e-governance. So you mentioned something like...
Once only.
Once
only.
Once only, exactly. That is a great principle. Why should a person who is already suffering from displacement or they've just lost the members of their family have to talk to many of us and tell the story again and again? And there was also something that was mentioned this morning, that we over collect information just in case. These are things that we should really also hold organizations accountable to the fact that they are over collecting. There's also the issue, and I think especially in cash, that we often use third-party companies on the ground because of safety reasons, or to reduce the risk, we just hire a company that would collect the data. And I've seen some really horrible stuff that is done by these companies. So it's really in lack of systems that are enabled by technology. We're just doing harm with collecting data.
And this is, I think, partly why we all wanted to come to Estonia, is to learn a little bit more about is it E-Road? X-Road. Oh, that's a shame. We could rebrand it because we don't want to be associated necessarily with X. But yeah, so for us to learn, because should there not be some form of X-Road for the humanitarian system? I mean, that's something that the Estonian tech community could help us to think about anyway.
Great. And I have one more question before I open it up for, sorry, I couldn't help it, because I think you did raise an important point, Zineb, which is one of the key criticisms of the humanitarian data approach. Are we extractive? Are we populations are struggling with what they call these days assessment fatigue. Do we continue to extract information? You mentioned, Javier, local communities are the owners of the data, yet we keep trying to pull more and ask for more and ask for more. Are we extractive? I guess it also goes into the localization agenda afterwards, right? Are we extracting or are we empowering somehow local actors, but also locally led action, local communities through data collection? And can that even be done? Can data collection be an empowering experience for local actors and local communities?
I think we are trying. I think we are failing because I've seen many surveys with a lot of information being collected, and only the statistic that is derived is just a summation, a number. So I think there is a lot of opportunities there, but also it's true that our sector is lacking a bit of interoperability. You know, everybody defines their own variables, everybody defines their own context. So lacking this interoperability among organizations, sometimes that makes us, not to us, but to some organizations, to recollect data and create this survey fatigue. I mean, as you said, it's incredible. And I was just talking to our colleagues in West Bank that they are supporting the escalation of hostilities, that they say we can go and ask them what are your needs when they have their house destroyed and they lost family members and so on. So, but also the lack of insensitive environments like that one is the data sharing doesn't flow as easy as we wanted, and that's why I think we're making that mistake of asking the same question over and over and over and over. But I hope with the technology, with the as you were saying in the previous question, a lot of private organizations are using satellite imageries to also derive data from secondary sources, so avoiding this going to ask to a family what happened. So Meta is sharing data on XDX, and they have been sharing also a lot of information based on, it's not about your Facebook accounts, no way. It's about satellite imageries that they process and they share it. Also World Pop is doing a lot of AI to extract information from the space, from satellites, so they can derive this information. As I said before, also Google research as well. So that, I think technology could help us to avoid this duplication. And then if you add interoperability and data sharing, that is always my flag. Please share your data on the platform. I think we will save time, cost, benefit, impact, and so on.
Luke.
Extraction and data being not just power but value. You're making me think of Marxist critique rather than a humanitarian panel. So I'll probably reserve that for later, but and try to think of something a bit more positive in terms of, there are some instances of particularly commonly owned data sets which are quite empowering. So OpenStreetMap, as you say, I am a big fan of mapping things in general, and OpenStreetMap is one of the great examples of a collective approach to solving a problem, which through engaging with people, through basically putting their community or their service or the lack of it onto a map, can be very empowering. And there's great examples in the Kibera slum in Nairobi and in many other places that I could describe, where the Red Cross uses that whole process as part of the vulnerability and capacity mapping with communities, where they can, once they see their the capacities that they do have, then and the different inequalities maybe within the community, then it is quite a powerful process for people to go through. So yeah, there are positives.
Zineb, what do you think?
Are we extracting? I think we should be. I mean, I want to share one story from a visit to a Venezuelan refugee camp or displacement camp in Colombia. The organization I was working for was developing a really super sophisticated mapping solutions using drones, using satellite imagery for mapping these different they're not camps, refugee camps, but they are developing very quickly, and they are often in areas that are hard to reach. And the mapping exercise is supposed to support the communities themselves, but sometimes the the objectives get lost in the way, and we are making nice tools, great visualizations or maps or solutions that are only serving at some high level that isn't really practical on the ground. But just to go back to that story, when we reach there, we, of course, like most communities, they're led by women, and then was this woman who was showing us around, and then she took us to a tent that is kind of their office, and showed us this super sophisticated map she's made herself, mapping all the different like water stagnation areas, or also like risky zones where people could get help, and she drew this all by hand. And it had, like, they were really great information products that she made herself, she made useful for the community, but we are not making use of that. We're not, I mean, it's probably not super useful to us, but I think it should be. Instead of us coming up with great solutions, sometimes we really should just talk to the communities and see what they have. And I think the example of the Red Cross working through volunteers is really great example of how this can be done, or how this could be really scaled up. But yeah, we have to go back to the volunteerism mindset again, which the aid system is coming further and further from. Yeah, so I think it is about really, kind of also thinking about decolonizing aid. It's not just us coming with the solutions, it's just us sitting in Europe and thinking this is the way it should be done. Sometimes people on the ground have already surpassed us by their solutions.
So data is not just power, but also empowering.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And move ahead from the data is power kind of mindset. Yeah.
Excellent, guys. Thank you so much. We now have 20 minutes to get questions from the crowd. Sorry, it's 10 minutes less than I wished, but it is what it is. So yes, just in front here, at the back there, 3. Let's take 3 at a time. That's how many I can remember at once. So yeah.
Hi, Konstantin from NorCap. I've got a question about partnership with big tech. If you can give some more reflections about what kind of compromises we're expected to go through to access this kind of support. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So who wants to take this?
Are we taking 3 before?
Let's take 3 at a time. All right. So first question on private partnerships, private sector engagement in data, and especially big tech. We'll take another question from there.
Thank you. Kristina, I'm from eGovernance Academy. We are an Estonian foundation that supports different governments around the world on increasing their prosperity and openness through digital transformation. And my question to you is about what is your experience or opinion about the role of different governments when you are actually working on the data in respective countries? Because not a single time did I hear a comment about cooperating with the government in question in the recipient countries. And they are usually the lawmakers or the gatekeepers or the openers when it comes to collecting data and using data about the population. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Eero, I think you were 3rd. And then we'll answer these, and then we'll take the next.
Yes, sorry. First of all, thank you for the panel. Really exciting. But one of the things you discussed, and I completely agree, is the kind of the over-extraction of data, and as we mentioned in the cash panel as well, we sometimes just tend to gather data just for the sake of maybe we will make use of it later on. Could you also maybe then extend this into the deletion of data, and when is humanitarian data then also deleted? So that we not only gather, but from the other end, we start also, not just archiving and actually keeping it, but then actually beneficiary data being deleted as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll take 3 at a time. So who wants to tackle the issue of, or not only issue, opportunity of big tech in humanitarian data? Javier?
Maybe I can give the first pass. So we see private organizations collecting and disseminating more information than before. So as I was mentioning before, some private organizations are sharing data on the platform. And one of the, within the Center for Humanitarian Data I was mentioning before, we have a data science team. So we're trying to, that team is trying to develop using advanced statistics, advanced analysis to anticipate the impact of a crisis. So they develop models based on climate data to be able to say, in case there is a flood in this part of the world, we can anticipate what will be the impact on vulnerable communities. The problem is that a lot of this climate data is coming from big companies that they are not sharing necessarily. So there's a lot of information about forecasts, and that is for sale. They don't share it publicly on XCX, and we have a lot of gaps on that. So even on XCX, we have one category that we have been doing a lot of research to try to bring more climate data to the platform. So what kind of hazards have been in the last years, and what has been the impact on communities. This data is not coming that often. So we're trying to partner with these organizations, and Meta is sharing some climate data sets. The team is also working with NASA and NOAA and other partners, but sometimes this data is so popular for insurance, so that's why they don't put it publicly on the platform. So I think that opportunity is growing, but since it may be also sensitive, is that it's being somehow locked on their password or on their protection. So I see future on private partnerships. Microsoft, they just reach out. They may have some needs assessments that they want to share on the platform. So we need to see before we put them on a public domain, just making sure it's anonymized, it doesn't have any situation that could put somebody on that. So I see more and more companies, but the issue of sensitivity is very much present. So we want to just make sure we don't damage anybody.
If I can add to that, yeah. So just like Javier and his team, we work a lot with Google, Microsoft, and Meta, actually. Often, of course, you've got to recognize that they're private companies, and you have to meet them. And they're big organizations, so you meet a lot of different people in different product teams and so on to actually derive the value out of that relationship. But we're really looking at trying to use the massive data that they have about behaviors, about movements, about all of these aspects to help us to basically understand and model what might happen in the event of emergencies. And just to expand a little on a project that we're working on, which is a global crisis data bank. So we have you'd think by this point that we would have a globally recognized data set which covers all emergencies. We really don't. We have some attempts at that, things like MDAT. We have national disaster loss accounting systems as well, but there's nothing that pulls all of that together. 100 years ago, somebody from the Red Cross called Raoul Montandon tried to do this, so we've called this project Montandon in honor of his failed attempt. Hopefully we won't fail, and honestly the only way we will be able to do this is to work with companies which have the capacity but also the access to data about what people do, what people want, what people are worried about. They do have that. They're reluctant to share it, basically because of the risk that they expose how much they know about us. Yeah. I think that's the main risk as far as they're concerned. It's reputational. So we understand that, but then if we can work with them, and we are, to make them understand that it's in their interests and our interests for us to be providing this support, that we can also do it using their platforms. I think that's the way to Because when we talk about the humanitarian system and what's outside, they're a massive player in the ecosystem and will only grow because delivery of assistance of goods, Amazon are interested in doing that, and they could dwarf WFP tomorrow if that's what they decided to do. And so, we need to acknowledge that that's something that we would need to engage with using our values and experience to make sure that it works for humanity, basically.
I want to just make sure we get as many questions as we can, but I'll take Eero's question maybe to you, Zineb, about this idea of deleting data that we don't need. Eero asked, we talk a lot about collecting of data. What do we do with it if we no longer need it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there are guidelines again, but how much they are applied is, I don't think so much. And this is where I think we need to build the deletion into the data acquisition, kind of. So it isn't... it's also very difficult to delete data properly, it's, as you know. So if we even just stick to anonymizing the data, that would be great. But I think in the case of HDX, you're pushing a lot for organizations to make data anonymized or at least pseudonymized. Or so deletion, I haven't seen much of it in my career. I don't know about you. If you do you ever delete data from HDX?
No. But we make sure that doesn't reach XDX in the first place. So if the data is sensitive, we have a mechanism to just stop data before it's being published. But also, we run an algorithm. It's called SDC macro, which is just a function that calculates the likelihood of a person to be re-identified. Of course, we remove the key variables like a name, last name, ethnicity, and everything. But you know that in some areas, if you know that it was the boulangerie, they call the guy from the bread store, and he's from certain demographic group. The provinces sometimes are so small that you are referring to this person. So so this algorithm is called SDC macro, developed by the World Bank, gives you the probability of a person to be re-identified. So we run that, and if the threshold is greater than 3%, we don't put that data. So we avoid putting it on the first place. And just going back to the documentation that you're saying and the guidelines, we do have a guideline for how to manage data incidents, what you have to do, how you have to delete it in case it went through a public domain, what means to create a data incident, how can you prevent it, and who has to be notified if that happens. Like you have to really go back to the person and say, no, we are sorry, but this situation happened. And it's a lot of nice templates that the center has been working on. As I said before, thanks to the DG ECHO that they supported that. And for every area, like for cash and voucher, for different areas and in the humanitarian response. So really inviting you to take a look at those because they're quite practical.
Thank you very much. And we'll do this one question, one answer system as well. But we have one more question at the back about the processes that are ongoing now and the investments into digitalizing digitalizing government systems, right? There's quite a lot of investment, quite a lot of momentum there. Does the humanitarian community tap into this digital capability of governments? Who wants to be the one that goes for this question?
I could quickly. Your question was really that we didn't mention government in any of our talks, and that's because we are not really talking much with government actors, unless the project is really involving government actors, which sometimes it happens, but it isn't by default. I think our interlocutors on the ground are often humanitarian organizations, mainly, or NGOs. And more and more governments, when they do have some data capacity, we start to have some interlocutors. For example, in Iraq, and with some work also in Jordan, we had talks with governments. But it's true that we could still do more there.
Yeah, we do talk with governments, especially because in our search for providing baseline information, we talk to the Ministry of Education to have the list of the location of education institutions. Also, we talk to the Ministry of Health to get the location of hospitals and clinic and emergency rooms. But we do have that interaction. Also, NSOs, National Statistical Offices, are often part of the XDX lineup of organizations. Not as many, as much as we wanted, because I don't know, like a data sharing not really like embedded in their soul. So it's difficult to convince them. But when we have been successful, those two ministries, education and health, has been very much forward sharing their information.
Yeah, I think the question is also about like the reluctance of government to share information, and often in some countries it's the business model that they share that data only as at cost, and so it's difficult then if you come basically you disrupt that business model for them. Great.
Thank you. We'll take 3 more questions.
There is
Great.
there is also one question online, so after this question I would take.
Great. So 1 question, 1 answer.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Roland Jefremov. I'm from the Estonian Rescue Board. I don't have so much of a question, but rather than share an experience. You talked about the earthquakes of Haiti and Morocco. I would like to share an experience related to the earthquake in Turkey.
There needs to be a question there. Let's make that a rule. There needs to be a question there, because there's quite a few people that want to ask something.
So the main thing regarded in Turkey was that there was also an information platform that we used, that all the responders used that were there. But the main conclusion of it was that it was basically the information necessary got lost very quickly, because you have a lot of people that put constantly the inputs in. So safety-related information got lost, the information regarding contacts got lost, and so on and so forth. And so also this world realized that this platform in this disaster was basically ineffective in some high related areas, and there they concluded basically that there has to be like dividing of information, like what is urgent and what is needed basically. And also at the moment they're doing like discussions of how to make the platform better. It's not like a question there, but just as an experience as you speak about the data collecting. But here is an experience that basically showed the other side of it, that in a way they are not effective all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that comment. We'll take a couple more. 1 more from the audience and then 1 online.
Let's do the online first, because I'm here already.
Yes, we have a question by Eero Sario, and the question goes: how to encourage the collaboration and sharing of learning and development materials and initiatives between humanitarian organizations? There's lots of duplication at the moment.
Thank you very much. Big question. We can have an entire conference on this, but we'll try to take this. And 1 more question. Choose anybody. Yeah, I don't want to make the decision.
I mean,
sure.
We also have half an hour break after that, so if we go over a few minutes, it's fine.
Thank you very much. So I will try to be quick. So how we all, the organization who are making like this data collection to know how to help people, how we can overcome the bias our future respondents can have, because like sometimes we are really very extractive. We are trying to deep the information which they don't want to share, but we need to know it, to know how to help them. So how we can overcome this general bias, like to help people understand why we're digging so deep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in case there is a reaction to the first comment, if anyone wants to react. And then the second question is around overall, how do we reduce duplication? How do we share not only data, but how we do things within organizations. And then a question about data bias and how can we prevent this from who wants to take which one?
I can take the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's
great.
I think I would take the question about the sharing of expertise. I guess I as much as I understood, or sharing of sharing in general is a tricky one. I think that the issue that we see with information management, or call it data or digitalization, that it's still pretty much siloed within the organizations themselves and then within the system. Of course, there are some collaborations, and that's great. There are some partnerships, but oftentimes, at least from my experience, it has been because there were individuals interested in working together rather than institutionalized partnership around data and digitalization. There is also, unfortunately, a lot of competition there, or somehow organizations are being territorial about data, as you may expect them to be, since data is power. So these are the challenges I see that are really are big blockage to sharing and to learning from each other, to working towards unified systems, so it is a challenge, and happy to hear your comments on it.
I don't know if you want me to add on that one, or I want to take also the one on the bias. So on the knowledge sharing, I think the Center for Humanitarian Data is also working a lot on developing models to anticipate crisis, and they're trying to also share those models with different organizations. Like, say, I developed this model, what have you shared, what is the methodology that you use, what are the caveats, and so on. And I see a lot of sharing on that, and especially on modeling, like as we know, and going back to 1976 when George Box said that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Nobody will be so precise. So as long as you share what's the accuracy of your model, what inputs you use to build that model, I think we will be growing as a community. And I was I was in a panel that I was attending, and they were presenting their models. Like, I can predict with this as fast as 2 days the impact of a flood or the impact of a hurricane. And I asked a question like, what is the accuracy of that model? Yeah, it's nice that you can develop it. And it's going back to this shiny attraction, like, a model, and sounds so sexy to say that. And I was only one organization, and it was actually from Luke's team, that the data scientists say, this model has an accuracy of 70%, which is like a very honest and transparent, So as long as we have this transparency, I think that the knowledge will be better transmitted. And just going on the bias question, my background is in statistics, so since I was not child, since I started working on this, metadata has been always present on me. And when we develop XDX, we decide that every data set that comes to the platform has to have the minimum elements of metadata, for people to understand and to reuse the data so they know what is the source of this information, what's the methodology that they use. Maybe they couldn't access certain areas, so they should have, they need to put that on the caveats and comments, what is the date of to which the data refers, and so on. And we do have a lot of, not training, because it's just it's a piece of cake, just a matter of make people conscious that when they share data, they have to provide these elements of metadata for us to be able to use it for analysis, for the community to be able to use for analysis. And many people, sometimes I knock doors, because part of my job is to knock doors and say, hey, you want to share data with XDX? And they're like, oh, yeah, but I didn't know I could do that. So say, yeah, welcome to the world of data sharing. But sometimes they don't have that embedded. Like they say, I will collect that, and I will just use it for my program, and I just keep it. Still, there are so many data sets on the hard drive of many computers that we just dying to have them on the platform. So just metadata, I would say, is very important for data sharing.
Luke, you wanted to touch upon the bias. Thank you, Javier.
Thanks. Just quickly on the learning, because I mean that question was asked by somebody in my team, so I should probably just one just to build on the transparency aspect. And thanks for mentioning Paula's work. But some of the most powerful initiatives that I've been involved in have been the ones which are interagency. So Inform is a great example of organizations coming together around a common need for some kind of analysis of structural risk, developing a common framework, and then developing a common product that pretty much everybody uses now. And that was from donors, organizations, and an academic. And Deep is a similar experience. Kobo, whilst the development is a fewer organizations, it's kind of those common goods, those common public goods, are the things that we really should be pushing towards. I mean, it's really interesting just having the conversation after the cash panel to reflect on whether there should be actually a push towards a common cash system, not owned by one organization, perhaps even inspired a little bit by the Estonian governance, just to mention that again. But yeah, it's clear because lots of different organizations are building their own cash system. And there are open source, we use Espo CRM, and so building upon what already exists together, I think, would be a powerful thing that we should be looking at. But on bias, yeah, I'm interested in the way that affects decision making predominantly, and basically you see that in the variable decisions that are made by doctors, for example. If before lunch you have you see a doctor and is hungry, and she then gives you a different diagnosis as she would after lunch, and if there are so many, I mean, dozens of different impacts on the way that humans process information and give judgment, even if it's their profession. And so we can't really change that. We just need to be very aware of it and build systems which, as much as possible, create collective intelligence, collective decision making, rather than allowing individuals who would maybe give a completely different answer the next day to be the ones who are solely in charge of really important decisions, like where and who gets humanitarian aid, for example.
Thanks very much. I know we're 6 minutes over, but I thought if there's one more really burning question that somebody definitely wants to ask. Everyone is eager for coffee. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm not even going to spend time on trying to conclude on this or summarize this topic, aside from the fact that I do like what you said in the end, that we should thrive to have these more, when it comes to technology and data, these digital public goods for the humanitarian sector that kind of eliminates these boundaries of which organization has more resources, who has more know-how, and really create these sharing and collaborative networks and platforms to not only share and analyze data, but also discuss the challenges that we face as humanitarians with information management and data. So thank you, everyone, for your engaging questions, and thank you to you guys.
Thank you.